The tavern at the crossroads of Ashenmere had no name. Locals called it the Hearthstone, though no sign hung above its door and no crest marked its walls. It was the kind of place where merchants nursed their ale in silence and travelers kept their hoods drawn low, a waypoint between somewhere and nowhere, forgotten by the maps of the kingdom. Soraya had worked there for 2 years. She poured drinks. She cleared plates. She memorized orders without writing them down and smiled at men who did not see her. To the patrons of the Hearthstone, she was invisible. A plain girl in a worn apron with calloused hands and downcast eyes, exactly what she needed to be. No one in Ashenmere knew that the quiet waitress who slept in the room above the kitchen could hear the thoughts of wolves. The gift had surfaced when she was a child, a strange warmth behind her eyes that let her sense the emotions and intentions of any shifted wolf within 100 paces. Her mother had recognized it immediately and beaten the secret into her with a ferocity born of terror. Mind speakers had not existed among the common bloodlines for over 300 years. The last one recorded in the histories had been burned alive by a pack lord who feared what she could reveal. So Soraya had learned to hide. She dulled her senses the way a musician might plug their ears in a thunderstorm, letting the world wash over her in muted shapes rather than sharp clarity. She served ale. She swept floors. She disappeared into the ordinary, until Kalen walked through the door. He had come to the Hearthstone on the first night of the autumn storms, cloaked in rough spun that did nothing to disguise the breadth of his shoulders or the way every head in the room turned when he entered. He moved like something barely contained, all coiled power and restrained grace, and when his gaze swept the tavern, Soraya felt her gift flare to life without her permission. His mind was a furnace, bright, vast, and burning with a controlled intensity that made her gasp behind the bar. She had sensed wolves before, travelers passing through, their thoughts simple and fleeting. But Kalen's consciousness was something else entirely. It radiated authority the way a bonfire radiated heat. Every instinct she possessed screamed a single word: Alpha. He had taken the corner table, ordered nothing but water, and watched the room with amber eyes that missed nothing. Soraya had approached with shaking hands to take his order, and when their eyes met, something inside her chest had cracked open like a door she never knew existed. He felt it too. She knew because his thoughts, so rigidly controlled, had stuttered. A single fractured image had bled through his defenses before he slammed them shut again. Her face, reflected in his mind like moonlight on still water. That was 6 months ago. In the time since, Kalen had returned every seventh night without fail. Always the corner table. Always alone. Always watching her with those amber eyes that burned brighter each visit. Their conversations had begun as fragments exchanged during the pouring of drinks, but fragments became hours. Hours became confessions, and confessions became something neither of them had the courage to name aloud. He told her he was a surveyor for a minor lord. She knew he was lying. His mind blazed with the weight of command, and sometimes, when his control slipped, she caught flashes of throne rooms and war councils and wolves bowing at his feet. She said nothing. Whatever he was hiding, she was hiding worse. On the night of the winter solstice, he had kissed her for the first time in the storage cellar beneath the tavern, surrounded by barrels of cheap wine and the smell of damp earth. His hands had framed her face as if she were something precious and breakable, and his lips had trembled against hers. "I should not be here," he had whispered. "If they knew what you are to me." "Then do not tell them," she had answered. He had pulled back to look at her, and in the low candlelight, his eyes had shifted from amber to molten gold. "You are my mate, Soraya. My wolf recognized you the moment I walked through that door. I cannot stay away from you any more than I can stop breathing." She should have told him the truth then, should have confessed that the gift pulsing behind her eyes could lay bare the mind of any wolf alive. Instead, she had kissed him again, and the truth had remained locked behind her teeth. 3 months later, in the same cellar, he had bitten her. The claiming mark sat low on her collarbone, hidden by the high neckline of her work dress. She touched it now as she moved between tables, feeling its warmth pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. Kalen was coming tonight. She could feel him approaching through the bond, a distant flame growing steadily brighter on the edge of her awareness. And tonight, she would finally tell him everything. Not just the gift she had hidden from the world, not just the truth about what she was. Tonight, she would tell him about the child growing inside her, the child whose presence she had confirmed 3 days ago, whose tiny consciousness she could already feel flickering at the edges of her mind like a candle flame just learning to burn. But as Soraya wiped down the bar and rehearsed the words she had practiced 100 times, the front door of the hearthstone swung open, and something far worse than her secret walked in. The man who entered was not Kalen. He was older, gray-streaked, with the bearing of someone accustomed to obedience. Behind him filed 6 more men in riding leathers, their postures rigid with purpose. Soraya's gift caught the hard edges of their thoughts before she could shut it down. Military precision, barely contained aggression, and a single word repeated across all 6 minds like a drumbeat. King. The gray-streaked man surveyed the tavern, and his eyes settled on Soraya with the calm certainty of someone who had already found what he was looking for. "Clear the room," he said. Not loudly. He did not need to. The regulars moved without argument, some leaving coins on the table, others simply abandoning their drinks. Within 2 minutes, the hearthstone was empty except for Soraya, the 7 men, and Haslan, the tavern owner, who stood frozen behind the bar with flour still on his hands. "You too," the gray-streaked man told Haslan. One of the soldiers stepped forward, and Haslan left without finishing his protest. Soraya gripped the edge of the bar. These men were wolves, all of them, and their thoughts carried the sharp tang of a mission nearing its end. They had been searching for something. For weeks. Found her. "My name is Tormund," the gray-streaked man said, pulling a chair from the nearest table and sitting as though he owned the room. "I serve as first advisor to the crown of Kelvara." The name hit Soraya like a fist. Kelvara, the seat of the Alpha King, the throne that commanded 12 territories, 8,000 wolves, and the largest standing army on the continent. The throne that belonged to a man she knew only as a surveyor with amber eyes and trembling hands. "In 4 days, the sovereign rite will take place at the Great Hall of Kelvar," Tormund continued, "the ceremony in which the Alpha King formally selects his queen from the daughters of the high bloodlines, a tradition that has governed succession for 11 generations. Soraya's mouth went dry. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because my king has spent 6 months visiting a nameless tavern at the edge of nowhere, and I would like to understand why before the most important political event of the decade is ruined by a barmaid with no bloodline and no standing." The words landed like blows. Soraya felt the mark on her collarbone burn, and she pressed her hand against it instinctively. Tormund's eyes tracked the movement. His thoughts shifted from suspicion to something colder. "Confirmation. He marked you," Tormund said flatly. "The fool actually marked you. You need to leave. I need you to listen. Kalen is not a surveyor. He is Kalen Vareth, Alpha King of Kelvar, blood of the founding pack. And in 4 days, he is expected to choose a queen from 5 candidates presented by the noble houses, candidates whose families command armies, control trade routes, and hold the balance of power across the entire realm." He paused, letting the weight of it settle. "If the noble houses learn he has already claimed an unmarked commoner, they will view it as an act of war against the bloodline system that holds this kingdom together. And if they discover what you carry—" His gaze dropped to her stomach. Soraya's blood turned to ice. "You have a choice," Tormund said, rising. Disappear quietly before the right, or watch everything he has built collapse around him. He placed a leather pouch on the bar, heavy with coin. The crown thanks you for your discretion. Soraya did not touch the money. She did not move at all until Tormund and his men had gone. She waited for Kaelin that night, waited in the cellar where he always came to her hands folded over the secret in her womb and her mind reaching for the familiar warmth of his presence. He did not come. For the first time in 6 months, the seventh night passed in silence. No amber eyes at the corner table, no whispered confessions in candlelight. Only cold and quiet, and the growing certainty that Tormund's visit had not been a warning. It had been a goodbye. 4 days later, Soraya stood in the servants' gallery of the great hall of Kelvar, hidden among the kitchen workers who had been permitted to watch the sovereign rite from above. She had told herself she would not come, had packed her things twice, unpacked them twice, and ultimately found herself on the road to the capital with no memory of deciding to go. She needed to see his face, needed to know if the man who had whispered mate against her skin would look for her in the crowd, would hesitate, would show any sign that the bond between them was real. The hall below blazed with firelight. Hundreds of wolves filled the chamber, their finest clothes a sea of silk and fur and polished silver. On the raised platform at the far end, 5 women stood in ceremonial white, each one a daughter of power and privilege. And before them, dressed in black and crowned with a circlet of iron thorns, stood Kaelin. Soraya reached for his mind without thinking. She had never tried at this distance, never pushed her gift beyond the walls of the hearthstone. But desperation drove her deeper than caution ever could. She found nothing. Where Kaelin's blazing consciousness should have been, there was only fog, a thick, impenetrable wall of gray silence where his thoughts, his emotions, his very self should have burned, as if someone had poured water over the furnace of his mind and left only smoke. Something was wrong. The High Officiant stepped forward. Kaelin Vareth, Alpha King of Kelvar, the realm awaits your selection. His steps were wrong, too even, too measured. The fluid, predatory grace she knew from 100 secret meetings had been replaced by something mechanical, like a puppet guided by strings she could not see. His eyes were the worst. Amber, yes, but flat. Lifeless. Windows into a room where no one was home. I select, he said, and his voice carried no inflection at all. Davina of House Morath. The hall erupted in celebration. The Moraths commanded the Western Territories, the largest military force outside the crown. The alliance was a masterstroke of political strategy. And Soraya, hidden in the gallery above, felt the mark on her collarbone split open with pain so acute that she bit through her own lip to keep from screaming. Blood filled her mouth. Her knees buckled. She caught herself on the railing, tasting copper and salt while the world below celebrated the death of everything she had believed in. Through tear-blurred eyes, she watched Kaelin take Davina's hand, watched him press his lips to her knuckles in the gesture of formal acceptance, watched the woman smile with the satisfaction of someone who had won a game she had been playing for years. And Kaelin showed nothing, felt nothing, was nothing. The fog in his mind did not waver. Wherever the real Kaelin was, he was not in that hall. But Soraya did not know that. All she knew was the blood on her lips, and the fire on her skin, and the sound of her own heart breaking so loudly she was certain every wolf in the kingdom could hear it. Soraya did not remember leaving the gallery. Her body moved on instinct, carrying her away from the sound of celebration the way an animal flees the smell of fire. One hand pressed against her collarbone, where blood had soaked through the fabric of her dress. The other wrapped around her stomach, cradling the life that pulsed against her palm like a second heartbeat. His child, growing inside her while he chose another woman, while he pressed his lips to another woman's hand. She had been a fool A fool who believed that a king could love a waitress. A fool who thought that whispered promises in a cellar carried the same weight as political alliances forged in throne rooms. Tormund had been right. She was a barmaid with no bloodline and no standing, and the bond she had built her hopes upon had been nothing more than a king's passing amusement. The stables were deserted. Soraya found a draft horse in the last stall, an old mare with a patient disposition and no brand marking her as crown property. She took nothing else. No saddle, no supplies, no keepsake from the months of secret meetings that had defined her entire existence. She left the way she had always lived, with nothing. The north road out of Kelvar was empty in the storm. Soraya rode without direction, letting the mare choose the path while her tears froze on her cheeks before they could fall. The mark burned beneath her blood-stained dress, a constant fire that should have been fading with distance. It was not fading. If anything, it burned hotter with every mile. A searing, relentless heat that pulsed in time with her heartbeat and seemed to grow more urgent as the lights of Kelvar disappeared behind the curtain of snow. She pressed her fingers against it and felt something beneath the pain. A pulling, a reaching, as if something vast and desperate was clawing at the other end of the connection, trying to hold on to a thread being stretched to its limit. "Stop," she whispered to no one. "Let me go." The pulling did not stop. Miles behind her, in the great hall where the betrothal feast was reaching its height, no one noticed when the Alpha King's hand suddenly flew to his chest. No one saw the way his flat, lifeless eyes flickered for a single instant with something raw and terrified. And no one heard the word that escaped his lips in a voice so quiet it was swallowed by the music and the laughter and the clinking of silver goblets. Soraya. But by then, she was already gone. The storm swallowed her tracks within the hour. Somewhere past midnight, on a stretch of road she did not recognize, she stopped. The mare stood patiently in the falling snow while Soraya pressed both hands to her womb and felt the tiny flutter of movement inside her. "It is just us now," she said softly. "Just you and me." The baby stirred, the mark burned, and somewhere far behind her a howl rose from the towers of Kelvar. Long, broken, filled with a grief so vast it seemed to crack the sky. Soraya did not hear it. She was already too far away. 4 months had passed since the night Soraya fled Kelvar, and the fishing village of Brindell had all but forgotten it had ever gained a newcomer. She had arrived in the dead of winter, soaked and half frozen, claiming to be a young widow named Nella who had lost her husband to a logging accident. The village elder, a stout woman named Grida with sharp eyes and a soft heart, had taken one look at her swollen stomach and offered her the empty cottage beside the smokehouse without asking further questions. In Brindell, people did not pry. The village sat on the rocky northern coast where the sea met the cliffs in a constant roar of salt and spray. Its people were fishermen, net menders, and kelp harvesters who measured their days by tides rather than politics. The Alpha King and his sovereign right might as well have been stories from another world. Soraya had made herself useful. Her gift, carefully dulled, allowed her to sense the simple emotions of the village wolves who shifted to fish the deeper waters. She could feel when a boat was approaching the shallows before it crested the horizon, and the fishermen had learned quickly that Nella the widow had an uncanny sense for weather and tides. She mended nets, she smoked fish, she kept her head down and her collar high and built a life so ordinary that no one would think to look twice at it. But the nights were a different country. Every evening after the village fell silent, and the only sound was the crash of waves against the cliffs, Soraya would sit in her darkened cottage with her hands on her stomach and feel the mark pulse with heat that should have been impossible. Among wolf kind, a rejected bond dissolved within weeks. The scar faded, the connection withered. The pain became a memory and then nothing at all. Yet hers had not faded. It had darkened, the tissues shifting from pale pink to a deep, bruised silver that seemed to glow faintly in moonlight. When the wind blew from the south, the burning intensified until she had to press a cold cloth against it to keep from crying out. And worse than the burning were the dreams. They came every night without fail. She would close her eyes and find herself standing in a vast, dark space that felt like the inside of someone else's mind. Fog surrounded her on all sides, thick and impenetrable. The same fog she had encountered when she reached for Kalen's thoughts during the sovereign rite. But in the dreams, the fog was not still. It churned. It thrashed. It clawed at invisible walls with a desperation that left her breathless. And somewhere deep within it, something called her name. Not with sound, with feeling. A raw, primal pulse of recognition that hit her so hard she would wake gasping, her pillow soaked with tears she did not remember shedding. "You are not real," she whispered to the darkness on those nights. "You chose someone else. You do not get to haunt me." But the presence never listened. Soraya told herself it was grief playing tricks, told herself the connection was simply taking longer to die because the child kept it artificially alive. She almost believed it. The village midwife, a cheerful woman named Petra, expressed surprise at her size during a routine visit, pressing experienced hands against her stomach and counting the kicks with furrowed concentration. "There is more than one in there, Nella. I have delivered enough children to recognize when a mother is carrying double." Twins. After Petra left, Soraya slid to the floor, her hands cradling the swell of her abdomen, where two tiny consciousnesses flickered like paired candle flames. She could feel them both, her gift registering their presence as soft, warm pulses of awareness that responded to her emotions with startling sensitivity. When she was calm, they were calm. When she was afraid, they stirred restlessly. And when the mark burned in the night and the dreams came calling, both flames would blaze brighter, as if reaching toward the same distant presence that their mother was trying so desperately to forget. The traders came to Brindell on the first warm day of spring. They arrived by boat, 3 men in a shallow drafted vessel loaded with salt, iron tools, and news from the south. Soraya hung back near the smokehouse, watching from a distance with the cautious stillness she had perfected over months of hiding. She would have stayed there, invisible and unremarkable, if young Ilva had not come running to find her with cheeks flushed from excitement. "Nella, you have to hear this. The traders are saying the strangest things about the king." Soraya's heart clenched. "What things?" "They say he has lost his mind, completely and truly lost it. He broke the betrothal to the Morith woman barely a week after the rite. Now he is tearing the kingdom apart looking for someone, and no one knows who." Against every instinct screaming at her to stay hidden, Soraya followed the girl to the docks. The crowd had gathered around the eldest trader, a weathered man who seemed to be enjoying the attention. "I am telling you what I have seen with my own eyes," the trader was saying. "The harbors at Kelvar are under military patrol. Every vessel searched. The king's personal guard has been deployed to every province, questioning anyone who has sheltered a stranger in the last several months." "What has this woman done?" someone asked. "That is the thing. No one knows. The king will not say her name, will not describe her face. He has only told his wolves to look for a woman traveling alone who may be with child." Soraya stopped breathing. "The reward is 15,000 gold crowns for information, 20,000 for her safe return." "She must be a criminal," Greta said. The trader shook his head. "If she were a criminal, he would send hunters, not his personal guard with orders to treat her gently. The wolves I have spoken to in the capital say the king does not sleep, does not eat. His control slips without warning. 2 weeks ago, he shifted in the middle of a council session and destroyed the chamber before they could restrain him." "The fisheries in the eastern waters have gone dark," the trader added. "Wolves who patrol the shipping lanes have gone feral. 3 merchant vessels lost in the last month. The kingdom is bleeding, and the king does not seem to care about anything except finding this woman." Soraya backed away from the crowd before anyone could notice her face. She made it to her cottage before her legs gave out. He was searching for her, tearing his own kingdom apart. 15,000 gold for information, 20,000 for her return. Why? He had chosen Davina, had spoken another woman's name before the entire realm. Unless Tormund had lied. The thought struck her like lightning. What if Kaelin had never sent him? What if the fog in Kaelin's mind had not been indifference at all? Her gift stirred, reaching instinctively toward the south, toward the distant furnace she had spent months trying to forget. She should not have reached. But the questions were too loud, and the mark was burning too fiercely, and the twins inside her were kicking with an urgency that felt like a command. She reached. And for one terrible, fleeting instant she made contact. It was not the fog she had felt at the sovereign rite. It was something else entirely. A mind on fire, blazing with such uncontrolled fury and grief that Soraya recoiled, as if she had touched a hot stove. In the fraction of a second before she severed the connection, she felt three things bleed through with absolute clarity. He was not searching for her out of anger. He was searching for her out of anguish. He had no memory of choosing Davina. And he had felt her reach for him. Soraya slammed her walls down so hard that her nose began to bleed. She sat in her chair with crimson dripping onto her apron, her heart hammering. She had made a terrible mistake, because if Kaelin had felt her touch his mind, even for an instant, then he now knew two things he had not known before. She was alive, and she was north. The confirmation came at sunset. Three shapes at the edge of the tree line where the forest met the cliff path. Large, four-legged, their fur dark against the fading light, their eyes catching the last rays of sun with an amber gleam that was unmistakably wolf. They were not village wolves. These animals stood with military stillness, their gazes fixed on her cottage with an intelligence that made her gift scream with recognition. Scouts. His scouts. They had found her. Soraya did not sleep that night. She sat in the darkened cottage with every candle extinguished, the silver knife she used for gutting fish laid across her knees. The wolves at the tree line had not approached. They had simply stood there as the light died, three dark sentinels whose presence announced what was coming more clearly than any herald. The knock came at dawn. Not the heavy, splintering knock she had expected. A measured rap, almost polite. Soraya gripped the knife and crossed the room on bare feet. She opened the door to a single man. Tall, dark-skinned, with close-cropped hair and a scar that ran from his left temple to the corner of his jaw. His eyes were the deep copper of old pennies, and they widened with unmistakable relief when they saw her face. "Thank the old blood," he murmured. "You are alive." "Who are you?" "My name is Draven. I am second shield to the Alpha King, and I have been looking for you for a very long time." "Tormund already found me," Soraya said flatly. "He gave his message. I listened. I left." Draven's expression shifted. His thoughts flared with a sharp, bitter anger that was not directed at her. "Tormund," he repeated carefully. "Tormund came to see you. Before the sovereign rite, he told me to disappear. He brought money." Draven closed his eyes. When he opened them, the anger had hardened into something cold and certain. "My lady, Tormund is a traitor." The words landed like stones dropped into still water. She stepped aside. Draven entered alone. He looked around the small room, taking in the mended nets, the narrow bed, the cold hearth, the sparse evidence of a life stripped down to its barest elements. "Tormund did not come to you on the king's orders," Draven said quietly. "Kaelin never knew Tormund had found you. He never knew Tormund had spoken to you at all." Soraya lowered herself into the chair by the window. "The night of the sovereign rite, someone administered a compound to the king, a blend of wolfsbane, nightshade extract, and a third substance our physicians have still not identified. It was introduced through the ceremonial wine, which only the first advisor has authority to prepare. Tormund? Soraya whispered. The compound suppressed the king's wolf entirely, his consciousness, his instincts, his connection to his mate, all buried beneath a chemical fog. He walked through the rite like a sleepwalker, spoke the words, chose Davina, and remembers none of it. The fog, the thick gray silence, the puppet-like movements, the flat, empty eyes, not rejection, violation. The effects wore off 5 days later. He woke screaming your name. Did not know where he was. Did not know what day it was. The first thing he did was run to the hearthstone. And I was gone. No trace. No message. The tavern owner said you had left in the night and taken nothing. Draven's voice softened. Kaelin nearly killed the man trying to get answers. The pieces she had assembled into a story of betrayal and abandonment were rearranging themselves into something far more horrifying. She had not been discarded. She had been driven away, deliberately, by the very man whose role was to protect the king. House Morath, Draven said. The Moraths have been positioning Davina for the throne since she came of age. Torment has been in their pay for years. Drug the king, force the selection, eliminate the inconvenient mate before anyone learned she existed. Draven withdrew a folded letter from his coat. The Morath crest was stamped into dark green wax. The message was written in a clerk's precise hand. The commoner carrying the king's illegitimate heir has been located in a northern coastal settlement. Agents have been dispatched. The matter will be resolved before the summer tides. Tormund has confirmed the target has no protection and no allies. Proceed without delay. Glory to Queen Davina. Soraya read it twice. The second time, her hands were shaking so badly the paper rattled against her fingers. They know where you are, Draven said. They know you are carrying the king's children, and they have sent people to make certain those children are never born. The twins kicked sharply, both of them at once. The king is not well, Draven continued. The missing mate, his wolf fighting for dominance over his human mind. He is holding on, but barely. If the connection is not restored soon, he will go feral. Permanently. I am not going to run again, she heard herself say. Before Draven could respond, the mark erupted with heat so sudden that she gasped aloud, and through it she felt something she had not felt in months. His presence. Not distant, not muted, close, vast, and bearing down on her with the unstoppable force of a tide that had been held back too long. A howl split the morning air, deep, resonant, filled with a longing so raw that every wolf in the village lifted their heads and whimpered in response. A shape moved on the cliff path. Massive, black-furred, eyes blazing with golden fire that cut through the mist like twin suns. The Alpha King had found his mate. The black wolf stopped 20 paces from her door. Soraya stood on the threshold, her hand pressed to the mark beneath her collar. The wolf was enormous, its shoulders level with her chest, its fur so dark it seemed to swallow the morning light. But it was the eyes that held her. Golden, burning, filled with recognition. The wolf lowered its great head, and Soraya felt his mind brush against hers. Not the fog from the sovereign rite, not the inferno she had touched during her reckless reach. Something between the two, a controlled blaze wrapped in trembling restraint. He was afraid. The most powerful wolf in 3 kingdoms was afraid she would turn him away. The shift happened in silence. One heartbeat he was wolf, the next he was man, kneeling in the windswept grass with his hands open at his sides. In the cold light, Soraya could see the damage, the hollowed cheeks, the bruised shadows beneath his eyes. The way months of sleeplessness and grief had whittled his body down until the bones showed through. "You are alive," he said. His voice cracked on the second word. Soraya opened her mouth to respond, but before the words could form, her gift screamed. Minds she had not sensed before, shielded with professional discipline, suddenly igniting with coordinated intent. 6 of them. No, 8. Converging from 3 directions. Get down! Soraya shouted. The crossbow bolt passed through the space where Kalen's head had been a half-second before, burying itself in the doorframe. Poison gleamed on its tip. The same compound that had stolen his mind at the sovereign rite, concentrated and weaponized. Kalen shifted mid-lunge. He hit the tree line like a battering ram, and the sounds that followed were terrible. Draven materialized beside Soraya, sword drawn, shoving her back through the doorway. Inside, now. There are 8 of them. I can feel their minds. 3 in the forest, 2 from the north cliff, 2 on the dock path, and 1. She froze. The 8th mind was different. Not a wolf at all. Human. Cold. Positioned directly above them. On the roof. She whispered. The ceiling shattered. A figure dropped through the broken timbers, dressed in black, face hidden behind a mask fashioned from a wolf's jawbone. Twin blades swept toward her stomach in a strike designed not to wound, but to kill what grew inside her. Draven's sword caught both blades an inch away. The masked assassin pressed forward with mechanical efficiency, each strike aimed at getting past the shield. Soraya's gift latched onto the assassin's mind without permission. What she found there made her blood freeze. No emotion, no hesitation, only a clinical inventory of targets. The primary target was not Soraya, it was the children. Something ancient and furious erupted from the deepest part of her consciousness. Her gift, always restrained, always dulled, always hidden, tore free of every barrier she had ever built. The wave of psychic force that exploded outward was invisible, silent, and devastating. Every wolf within 300 paces staggered. The assassin dropped both weapons and clutched their skull, shrieking behind the jawbone mask. Outside, the attacking wolves collapsed mid-stride, their coordinated assault dissolving into writhing confusion. For 5 seconds, every hostile mind within range experienced the full, unfiltered force of a mind speaker pushed past her limits. They felt her terror, her rage, the fierce protectiveness of a mother whose children had been marked for death. The masked assassin crumpled. 2 wolves fled into the forest, their minds too scrambled to maintain their shift. The others lay motionless in the grass, but it cost her. Soraya swayed as the room tilted sideways. Blood poured from her nose, her vision fractured. She felt her knees buckle. Kalen caught her before she hit the ground. Human again, blood on his hands and fury in his eyes, but his arms impossibly gentle. He lowered her to the floor, cradling her head against his chest, one hand pressed to her stomach where the twins thrashed. "What did you do?" he breathed. "Later," Soraya managed through the blood. "Are there more?" Draven checked the perimeter. All down. 6 unconscious. 2 fled. Whatever she did, it hit every hostile in range. He looked at Soraya with an expression that mixed awe with something close to fear. "My lady, what are you?" Draven left them alone. He cleared the ruined cottage until it held nothing but 2 people, a shattered ceiling, and months of unspoken anguish. Soraya sat against the wall beneath the window, a blood-stained cloth pressed to her nose. Kalen knelt 3 feet away, close enough to touch, but not touching, as if he understood that the distance between them was not measured in inches. "You are a mind speaker," he said quietly. "Since birth. My mother taught me to hide it. She said they would kill me if anyone found out." She felt the pieces rearranging in his mind, the way she had always seemed to know his mood before he spoke. The way she had flinched when crowds grew too loud. The way she had known, always known, that he was more than a surveyor. "You knew what I was. From the beginning. Your mind burns brighter than anyone I have ever encountered. Hiding that is like hiding the sun behind a curtain. And you said nothing. You said nothing either. We were both liars, Kalen. We both hid what we were because we were both afraid of what the truth would cost. Tormund, he said, and the name came out like a curse. My own first advisor. The man who raised me after my father died. He drugged you. He came to the hearthstone before the rite and told me to disappear. And you believed him. I believed what I saw, Kaelin. I reached for your mind during the ceremony. Where your thoughts should have been, there was nothing. Fog. Silence. You looked at Davina like she was the only person in the room, and your mind was a blank wall. Because I was not there. The roar shook the remaining timbers. He was on his feet, fists clenched, eyes blazing gold. Do you think I chose that? Do you think I wanted to wake up 5 days later with no memory and a woman I despise wearing a crown meant for you? How was I supposed to know that? Soraya shot back, rising despite the dizziness. Your advisor told me to leave. Your mind was empty. You chose another woman in front of every wolf in the kingdom. What was I supposed to think? Yes, because that is exactly what happened. And I had no way of knowing that. I stood in that gallery with your child growing inside me, watching you kiss another woman's hand, and I felt the mark you gave me tear itself apart. Do you have any idea what that felt like? Yes. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. I know exactly what it felt like, because I have felt it every single day since I woke up and found you gone. The rage drained from her so quickly she swayed. What poured through the connection was not anger, it was devastation. Raw, unprocessed devastation that he had been carrying while he tore his kingdom apart. I woke up screaming your name. I did not know what day it was. Draven had to hold me down while they explained what had happened. I ran to the hearthstone. Your room was empty. Your things were gone. And the connection was screaming. Every hour of every day. I could feel you out there somewhere, alive, afraid, and I could not find you. His hand moved to his own chest. Every time it burned, I knew you were still alive. That one point of fire was the only thing tethering me to sanity. Tears slid down Soraya's cheeks. She did not wipe them away. I thought you had thrown me away, she whispered. I thought everything between us was a lie. You are everything. Kaelin crossed the distance between them and took her face in his hands. His palms were rough, calloused, trembling. You are my mate, the mother of my children, the only soul my wolf has ever recognized as its equal. How could you think I would choose anyone else? Because I watched you do it. The words broke something in his face she had never seen break before. His composure, his kingship. All of it crumbled, and what was left was just a man, exhausted and heartbroken, holding the face of the woman he loved. They took my will, he said, barely audible. They poured poison into my blood and stole my mind and used my body to destroy the most important thing in my existence. And I could not stop them. Her hands came up to cover his. 2 wounds that had been bleeding separately for months, finally pressing together. I love you, he said. I have never spoken those words to anyone. I should have spoken them to you 100 times in that cellar, but I was a coward who thought he had time. I love you. I loved you when I thought you had betrayed me. I loved you through every night of exile, and none of that fury changes the fact that I have never stopped being yours. He kissed her, desperate, clumsy, salted with tears from both of them, so raw with need that the connection between them ignited like a fuse. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, his eyes were pure gold. Come home with me, let me make this right. There is nothing right to go home to. Tormund is still in your castle. The Moraths still have allies in your court. And your kingdom is falling apart. She took his hand and pressed it to her stomach. He felt both twins kick against his palm, and his expression shattered and rebuilt itself in the space of a single breath. Then we do not just go home, he said, his voice hardening. We take it back. They rode south through the night, Soraya seated before Kaelin on a black destrier. His arm circled her waist, and for the first time in months, the mark on her collarbone did not burn. It hummed, a low, steady warmth that pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat against her spine. The twins had settled into the first peaceful stillness Soraya could remember, as if the proximity of their father had answered a question they had been asking since conception. He told her about waking from the chemical oblivion, finding Davina at his writing desk in a silk robe, drafting announcements for their coronation. How the sight of her had triggered a shift so violent his guards had to drag Davina from the room. He told her about the confrontation with the council, 15 lords who insisted the selection was binding, the Morath delegation who threatened withdrawal of military support. He had dissolved the betrothal anyway. On the 6th day, standing before the full court with blood under his nails from an uncontrolled shift, he had declared the selection void and ordered Davina removed from the castle. They called it madness. Lord Morath said I was unfit to rule. Half the council agreed. I did not care. The only thing I cared about was finding you. And Tormund stood beside you through all of this? He counseled patience, urged me to accept Davina for the sake of stability. I thought he was the only advisor who still had my interests at heart. His arm tightened around her waist. He was steering me away from you the entire time. He will need to be dealt with carefully, Soraya said. If we expose him openly, the Moraths will scatter and destroy evidence. She felt his surprise through their connection. He had expected grief, not strategy. You have been thinking about this, he said. I have had months with nothing to do but mend nets and think. A faint rumble of laughter vibrated through his chest. The first genuine warmth she had felt from him since their reunion. It faded quickly. The kingdom is worse than the traitors reported. The eastern provinces have declared semi-autonomy. Feral incidents increasing. Villages near the southern border evacuated. Because the Alpha connection is broken, Soraya said quietly. Your instability bleeds through every pack link. Every wolf in Kelvara feels your suffering whether they understand it or not. Soraya turned in the saddle. You know what completing the bond means. A common-born mind speaker as queen. No bloodline, no political alliance. You are my strategic value. The woman who just shattered 8 trained assassins with her mind, carrying the first true bond heirs born to the royal line in 6 generations, and the only person alive who can look into the thoughts of every wolf in my court and tell me which ones are loyal. You do not just want me as your queen, you want me as your weapon. I want you as my partner. The weapon is a bonus. Dawn was breaking when a rider intercepted them on the south road, his horse lathered and his face gray with urgency. My king, Tormund has moved. He declared you mentally unfit before the emergency council. Lord Morath has brought 3,000 soldiers to the capital. They have seized the gates, the armory, and the Great Hall. They have taken 43 hostages from your personal household. Servants, attendants, anyone loyal to the crown, to be executed at midday unless you surrender. Kaelin went rigid behind her. And Davina has returned. She is wearing the queen's circlet. Soraya felt his control fraying, his wolf surging toward the surface. She placed her hand over his. Not yet. Not like this. We need a plan, not a massacre. She closed her eyes and reached outward with her gift, stretching it toward the distant walls of Kelvar. Tormund's cold calculation. Davina's brittle ambition. 43 frightened minds waiting to die, and something she had not expected. Dozens of wolves wearing Morath colors whose thoughts carried not loyalty to Lord Morath, but deep, simmering resentment. Soldiers following orders they despised. Wolves waiting for their true king to return. We do not need to storm the castle, Soraya said, opening her eyes. We need to walk through the front door. The great hall of Kelvar, seen from the floor, was vast and cavernous, its vaulted ceiling disappearing into shadows that the torchlight could not reach. The Marath serpent hung above the throne. Soraya walked through the main doors alone. She had argued with Kaelin for an hour. In the end, it was the truth she spoke through their connection, mind to mind, that convinced him. I can reach every mind in that hall. You cannot. If we attack from outside, the hostages die. If I go in alone, I can find the loyal wolves, coordinate from within, and open the way for you. No one else alive can do this. He had let her go. She had felt his anguish with every step she took toward the castle gates, a howl of protest locked behind his teeth, because he understood that love without trust was just another cage. The hostages knelt in a row before the raised dais, their hands bound with iron cord. At the center of the row, her gray hair matted and her face bruised, knelt Aneth, the old cook from the hearthstone who had slipped her extra bread and asked no questions about the man who visited every seventh night. On the throne sat Tormund, the first advisor who had orchestrated everything, seated on the throne of the king he had betrayed. Davina stood beside him, the queen's circlet glinting on her pale hair. Lord Morath occupied a chair to the left, his military bearing rigid. "My name is Soraya," she said, and her voice carried across the silent hall. "I am the woman your false regent has been trying to kill. I am carrying the true heirs of Kelvara, and I am offering you a trade. Release the hostages, all 43 of them. Take me in their place." Tormund's expression did not change, but his thoughts stuttered with genuine shock. She felt the calculation ripple through his mind. 43 commoners versus the mate connection and the royal heirs. Not even close. "Release them," Tormund ordered. The soldiers cut the hostages free. Soraya watched them stumble toward the doors, counting each one. The last was Aneth, who stopped before her with tears streaming down her bruised face. "Run, girl," the old cook whispered. "Run while there is still time." "I am done running," Soraya said softly. The doors closed, and Soraya stood alone in the hall of her enemies. But she was not alone. Not truly. While she had been speaking, her gift had been working. Silently, precisely. Reaching into every mind in the hall and sorting them. She found 37 Marath soldiers whose thoughts seethed with resentment and secret allegiance. She touched each mind with a single, clear message. "When the signal comes, turn on your commanders. The king is here." And to Kaelin, through their connection, she sent something simpler. "Now." "Seize her," Tormund said, rising, "and bring the physician. I want the children examined before—" He never finished. Soraya's gift detonated, not the unfocused blast from the cottage. This was surgical, targeted, a spike of psychic force into every hostile mind simultaneously, a pulse of disorientation that lasted 3 seconds but was enough to stagger every Morath loyalist. In those 3 seconds, 37 wolves turned on their commanders, and the doors of the great hall exploded inward. Kaelin hit the hall in wolf form, a black hurricane of fang and fury. Behind him poured a tide of wolves, hundreds of them, their howls shaking the ancient stones. The Morath soldiers, already reeling, collapsed like a wall struck by a flood. But Tormund was not a man who accepted defeat. He crossed the dais in 3 strides and seized Soraya from behind. A blade appeared at her throat, its edge pressed against the mark on her collarbone. "One more step," Tormund called out, "and I open her throat." Every wolf in the hall froze. Kaelin shifted to human form. He stood 15 paces away, close enough to see the blade dimpling her skin, too far to reach her before steel met flesh. "Let her go, Tormund, and I will make your death quick." "You always were sentimental. I raised you, Kaelin. I shaped you. And you threw it all away for a barmaid who can read minds." Soraya felt the blade press deeper. A thin line of warmth trickled down her collarbone. Blood. running over the mark he had given her in a cellar that smelled of cheap wine and forever. She did not need to overpower Tormund, she only needed to reach him. Her gift slipped past his defenses like water through cracked stone. She did not attack his mind. She showed him something. She opened the connection between herself and Kaelin and let Tormund feel, for one searing instant, exactly what a true mate bond contained. The love, the fury, the bottomless devotion of two souls that had recognized each other across every barrier the world had placed between them. Tormund gasped, his hand trembled, the blade wavered, and Kaelin moved. The distance vanished in a single heartbeat. Kaelin did not shift. He crossed the 15 paces as a man, his hand closing around Tormund's wrist with a precision born of a lifetime of combat training. The blade was wrenched from Soraya's throat, and Tormund was hurled backward, skidding across the polished floor until his back struck the base of the throne he had stolen. Soraya stumbled forward. Kaelin caught her, pressing his hand against the thin cut, his eyes searching her face. "I am fine. Finish this." The bulk of the Morath soldiers had surrendered. Lord Morath had rallied a corps of 20 loyalists near the eastern colonnade. Davina had retreated to the dais steps, a sword she clearly did not know how to use clutched in both hands. Tormund rose from the floor, blood running from a gash on his temple. She caught the shift in his mind before he could hide it. Resignation. "You think this ends with me? The Moraths are one house. There are others who believe a common-born queen will weaken the crown beyond recovery." The whispers will not stop. "Then I will spend the rest of my reign fighting," Kaelin replied. "And I will win. Because a king who fights for his mate fights with the strength of the bond behind him. You tried to break it, and it nearly broke the kingdom instead." He turned to the assembled wolves. "You all felt it. The instability, the feral incidents, the crops that failed. That was not madness. That was a mate bond being torn apart by treason." He drew Soraya forward until she stood beside him on the dais. "This woman is Soraya. She is a mind speaker, the firstborn to the common bloodlines in 300 years. She carries my children. She is my fated mate. And she is the reason every wolf in this hall is still standing, because she reached into the minds of 37 soldiers and turned the tide of a battle without spilling a drop of blood." Silence. Then Draven, bloodied and battered, stepped forward and knelt. One knee, fist to chest. Another wolf followed. Then 3 more. Then a dozen. The sound of knees hitting stone rippled through the hall like a wave until every wolf who had fought for Kaelin knelt before the woman they had not known existed an hour ago. "You were never his queen," Soraya said to Davina quietly. "You were a transaction, and he was not even present for the negotiation." Lord Morath assessed the situation with the pragmatism that had built his fortune. "I will cooperate in exchange for the survival of my house." "You will cooperate because the alternative is extinction," Kaelin replied. "Cooperation is not a bargaining position. It is the only reason you are still breathing." Guards took Morath and his loyalists. Tormund was dragged from the dais in chains. And in the sudden quiet, Kaelin turned to Soraya. "It needs to be completed. Here. Now. Before every wolf in the kingdom, so that no one can ever question what we are to each other." Soraya looked out at the kneeling wolves, the blood-stained floor, the broken doors through which morning light was streaming. No ceremony, no white gown, no music, only the wreckage of a battle and the raw truth of 2 people who had survived everything the world had thrown at them. It was perfect. "Then claim me, properly this time, where everyone can see." Kaelin stepped close, his hand cupped the back of her neck, tilting her head to expose the collarbone where his original mark still burned silver. He pressed his lips to the scar, and she felt his breath shudder against her. Then his teeth sank in, directly over the old mark, renewing it, deepening it, making it permanent. The bond ignited. Not pain. Completion. as if a door she had been pressing against for her entire life had finally swung open. His consciousness poured into hers, and hers into his. Two rivers meeting and becoming something larger than either had been alone. She saw herself through his eyes. The night he had walked into the hearthstone and felt his wolf lurch with recognition. The months of returning, unable to stay away. The terror of waking without her. The endless search. And beneath it all, the absolute certainty that she was his, and he was hers, and nothing in the world could change that. He saw himself through hers. Not a king who had failed her, but a man whose love had been weaponized against him, who had fought his way back across a kingdom's worth of distance, who let her walk into danger because he trusted her strength even when every instinct screamed to protect her. When Soraya pulled back, her teeth leaving the reciprocal mark on his throat, every wolf present could feel it, the completed bond radiating outward from the dais like heat from a forge. "My queen," he whispered. "My king," she answered. And outside the shattered doors of the great hall, across the capital and beyond, wolves lifted their heads and howled. Not in grief, not in fury, in recognition. The bond that held the kingdom together had been restored. Justice came swiftly. Tormund was tried before the assembled packs on the third day. Soraya stood beside Kaelin on the dais, corroborating every testimony with the absolute certainty of a mind speaker who could confirm truth from lie. Tormund offered no defense. In his final moments, he looked at Soraya with an expression she could not quite decipher. "You were never supposed to matter," he said quietly. "You were supposed to be nobody. That was your mistake. You measured worth by bloodline. The bond measures it by soul." Tormund was executed at sunset. Lord Marath's life was spared in exchange for the complete dismantling of his intelligence network, laid bare under Soraya's unflinching gaze. Davina was exiled to the barren eastern reaches, stripped of her name and her claim, sent to build a life from nothing. The difference was that Davina went with provisions, an escort, and the mercy of a queen who understood what it meant to lose everything. The kingdom healed the way a bone heals after being properly set, slowly at first, then with gathering strength. The feral wolves returned to their senses. The eastern provinces withdrew their declaration of autonomy. The coastal clans answered the summons again. Crops pushed green shoots through the thawing soil. Soraya took to the throne quietly and competently. She sat in council meetings and listened to the thoughts behind the words, gently steering debates toward honesty. The nobles who had whispered about common blood found their objections dissolving in the face of a queen who could tell them what they were really thinking before they finished their sentences. On a warm evening in late summer, Soraya gave birth to twins. A boy with his mother's dark hair and his father's amber eyes, whose tiny mind blazed with the unmistakable warmth of a mind speaker's gift. A girl with her father's black hair and her mother's brown eyes, who shifted into a small silver-furred wolf within the first hour of her life and had to be coaxed back into human form by both parents and a very startled midwife. Kaelin held his children with hands that had torn apart a kingdom and rebuilt it, hands that trembled now with a tenderness so vast it made Soraya's eyes sting. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough and full, "for surviving, for fighting, for walking into that hall alone when any sane person would have run." Soraya reached up and traced the mark on his throat. Silver scar tissue, perfectly matched to the one on her collarbone. Twin marks that proclaimed, to any wolf with eyes to see, that these two souls had found each other across distance and betrayal and silence. "I was never alone," she said softly. "Even when I thought I was, you were always there." Kaelin kissed her forehead, then the forehead of each child in turn. "Always," he agreed, "in this life and whatever comes after." Outside their window, the wolves of Kelvar lifted their voices to the evening sky, And in the great hall below, where the Morath serpent had been torn down and the true banners restored, the story was already being told. The story of a waitress who looked under the table and whispered a warning that changed the fate of a kingdom, of a bond that poison could not sever and distance could not break, of a mind speaker who walked into the heart of her enemy's power and turned their own soldiers against them with nothing but the truth. They had found each other against every odd the world could stack, and they would never be parted again. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story.